All right, welcome back to the Comics Multiverse. This is a show I do whenever I have a chance where I get bring in some comic creators and let them talk about either the projects they're working on or have whatever they're doing. But today we are going to be talking to a couple people involved with Planet Divoc-91. It's a 9-part allegorical webcomic, which kind of spun out of the issues related to the thing that we, as a planet, have been dealing with for the past 2 years or so. Well, 2 years. The COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to bring in my guests and let them introduce themselves and how their role in the project. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, good to see you.
So we'll start with Sara. Can you introduce yourself and kind of your role in the project?
Sure. My name's Sara Kenney, and my background, I guess, is science engagement, TV, and more recently comics. And I guess I kick-started this project working with a colleague, Professor Bella Starling, back in, would have been March, April 2020, when the pandemic first happened. And it started with a really small kind of comic strips. We just had a few grand sort of budget, and it grew into this sort of epic 9-part global project working with 45 young people around the world. As the sort of pandemic went on, we kind of, it just grew and grew in terms of sort of thinking about what needed to be done to amplify young people's voices. So I initiated it with a colleague of mine, and I just asked comics people if they'd be interested in doing a chapter, sort of an exquisite corpse type thing. And I wrote chapter 1 and I wrote chapter 9, and then brought on Jimmy, but I'll let Jimmy explain his role in it.
Hi, so I'm James Devlin. I've worked in the industry for nigh on 20 years now. The first time I worked with Sara, my introduction to Sara was actually on Surgeon X. That was Sara's creator-owned comic that she done for Image. And that was Karen Berger, who was the editor on that. I had worked with Karen previously at Vertigo. So she put me in touch with Sara. John Watkiss was the artist, the late John Watkiss. So I was doing colouring on that. And ever since then, me and Sara, we've kept in touch. We've always worked on little projects here and there every few months or so. So it was only natural that eventually we'd get back into working on a slightly bigger project together. And we've actually got something on the back burner just now. But Sara basically got in touch with me when the pandemic happened, and says, "Would you be interested in coming on board with this? I'm going to try something different." I'll maybe let Sara talk about this, because this was the first time either of us had went down the road of doing webcomics on WEBTOONs. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was an interesting one doing on WEBTOONs, because I'm new to comics, I would say, and we were trying to, when we first started the project, it wasn't necessarily going to be a comic. We kind of spoke to lots of young people and said, what format are you interested in? And they were interested in comics, and we were looking at WEBTOONs then as an option, because there was, it was free, and it's kind of used by, it's got quite a young audience. And one of the main things was, most people, when we were looking at working sort of with South Africa, in India as well, most people have phones, but they won't necessarily have laptops or tablets. So we were kind of looking at, well, what format where they wouldn't have to necessarily buy a comic, could they sort of experience this story? And I'm doing this. That's what happens. You scroll up. And so we had quite a few conversations about how that would work, because obviously WebToons is mostly this sort of scrolling up way. And do we still want it to, look more like a traditional comic? So I remember in the early days, Charlie Adler was artist. We're very lucky to get Charlie to do chapter 1, and Jimmy, me and Charlie sat down. We had a conversation about, well, would we go, the single panel scroll up, or would we kind of stick to a more traditional format? And we wanted to do that because we wanted to see the print copy. Yeah, print copy. We really wanted to one day have, a print copy in our hand that we could share with the team and it have a bit of a legacy, I guess. And so, yeah, we Jim, do you want to describe a bit how poor Jimmy, he had all the technical of how you do it so that you can view it on a phone as well. The size. Yeah,
we could have just went like 100% down the Webtoons route, but we're buttons for punishment, I think we're all old school, and as Sarah says, we all just wanted that satisfaction of holding a printed copy in our hands one day. So I took a good look at Webtoons. We looked at Tapas as well, another website. And I can't remember why we settled on Webtoons exactly, but one thing did strike me about Webtoons is that the subject matter of a lot of the comics, it tended to be romantic dramas or slice of life kind of stuff that kind of translated quite well into the medium of Webtoons, because a lot of the stuff was consisting of dramatic close-ups and very sparse backgrounds, because it's very conversational, and it looks good. It works perfectly for those genres. But the problem that we potentially faced was that because our subject matter was a bit more expansive, there was going to be like certain kind of action set pieces. There was going to be quite an extensive cast of characters. So we did want to kind of try and maintain that comic book vibe with the layout of the panels. And also, we did look at the fact that a lot of Webtoons, you can't, when you're designing your Webtoon comic, as you would know, Chad, you can just scroll right through it. So you don't really need to bother with the mechanics of making a page look compositionally good the way you would a normal comic. But do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not saying that to diss the Webtoons comics, but what I mean is it's not even an issue if you just decide to do it like one panel at a time. That's totally cool. But what we found was that wasn't going to look good once you actually took that and printed it out. And we also kind of considered the idea of just drawing it like a normal comic book page and then cutting all the panels out for Webtoons. Mm-hmm. But very soon realised that was going to be a horrendous task, and it wouldn't necessarily look the best. So what we did was we ended up settling on what I think was a good kind of middle ground, where we limited ourselves to no more than 3 panels per page, because it's a lot smaller, like we had to kind of experiment with like the lettering. The lettering had to be done in 2 different sizes. So we would have like a standard comic book lettering size for the printed version, but then we would have this like enlarged. I can't remember how many percentage points we had to push it up, but we had to do like a lot larger version. So Hassan had to letter the comic twice, essentially. But yeah, we eventually settled on what I think was a nice compromise. It looks like the perfect cross between, a traditional comic book and a webtoon. So.
Yeah, so we kind of set ourselves a challenge right at the beginning, and it was it's also been translated into Hindi and Hausa. So we had Robin Jones came on and worked with our translators to get us all those versions. They're not in print yet, but they're available on Webtoons. But yeah, and I guess in terms of the story, because it's a sci-fi. It's like we said, it was about 2 characters, Sanda and Champo, who are kind of young, and they get zapped to another planet. They find themselves on this planet, Planet Divoc-91, and they're trying to figure out you know, what's going on, and they meet these aliens, and they, I guess in a way it sort of mirrored what a lot of people were feeling, you know, with kind of what is this new world? How do we navigate it? There's sort of stories about misinformation, you know, sort of about tensions between different groups, etc. And it was an interesting process because all of that came out through workshops we held with young people and scientists and historians and sociologists. So we had this sort of quite elaborate process of working with the young people to kind of come together. We told them, right, who they were going to be interviewing. We'd have conversations about what sort of questions they want to ask. And then they would do the interviews. They would be in charge of interviewing the experts. And then they would tell us sort of what they thought the sort of key interesting points were. And then sometimes we would bring in the artists or the writers. So Hannah Berry, Carrie Fransman, various people like that. They came to a workshop with the young people. And they would have an interchange about what their thoughts and feelings were about that subject matter. And then they would go away and sort of write and create. So it was quite an involved process. And our first science interviewee was Sir Patrick Vallance, who's our chief government scientist. So we were all absolutely bricking it. We're like, oh my God, how did this happen? It's like in the middle of the pandemic, and the guy who stands up next to the Prime Minister on the telly is the first interviewee. So it was quite terrifying. We were all quite nervous, but the young people were amazing. Like, you know, 16, 17, 18-year-olds sort of asking the questions. And over the period of 6 months, what was extraordinary is watching them grow in confidence. And we were working with people from quite marginalised backgrounds, sort of living in townships, living in hostels, going through this in hostels, in various sort of care settings, a mixture. And in India, we had sort of quite a lot of young professional scientists. But you watching them grow in confidence, and when they spoke to the scientists, and you know, eventually they went into a conference where they were speaking in front of Chris Whitty, the other, you know, big Uber being in UK science. It was the amazing thing was watching how they dealt with the material, had story ideas, and kind of, you know, were just brilliant. We ran one workshop about the end, like how should it end, and so we ran a workshop with Kieran Gillen, Jeremy Della, another documentary expert, and we were talking about what makes a good ending, you know, so the difference between dystopic endings, what pitfalls and all of that, and you know, the questions and the ideas they had. We took all of those and, you know, wove them into the story. So the process, you see the comic, but actually there's all this other stuff that was going on to sort of get us there.
Now, is there, you know, a certain character within the story that, you know, each of you maybe identify with, or, you know, kind of a favorite character or moment?
Well, I don't know if you want to go first on this, Sarah, since you created the characters.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we all created the characters. Mine, I came up with the original ideas for the characters. And then obviously Charlie designed them and kind of developed them. I suppose so the two, you've got Sanda, who's the protagonist, you can see here, Elsa Charette, who did this most amazing cover here. And then Champo is their sibling. And actually, I don't think my cousins will mind saying that they were kind of inspired by them. So my cousins are Trinidadian, half Burmese, half Trinidadian, and they came to the UK when they were about 14, 15, 16, around that. And so they kind of inspired me a bit in terms of this idea of a big journey, you know, starting in one place and ending up somewhere else. And their dynamic, their sibling dynamic is really interesting. They're quite different characters. And through the journey, Sanda's journey, she's somebody who's quite conspiracy theorist, doesn't really trust people, just kind of wants to get home, just hates the space. But by the end of it, her journey is trying to sort of become a leader in a situation that is kind of really, really messed up. Whereas Champo, you know, is not having a good time on Earth. And what they enjoy about being on Planet Divoc-91 as a sort of a non-binary person is that they're referred to as just humans. And they like the idea of just being called human. As you know, because there's all these sort of different aliens there. So they really got into it. They got into the puzzles and the trying to figure out how, you know, what was going on, and they really enjoyed their experience there. So you had and I think again that sort of kind of mirrors the pandemic. I've got like friends who are, you know, parents, both furloughed, having a bloody lovely summer, right? You know, just sitting on the beach doing whatever, and then other people who are trying to work full time with kids in the house and having a total nightmare. So yeah, exactly. I was one of the people who didn't get, you know, I didn't get furlough or any of the sort of whatever funding, but so I think people's experiences were really different, and depending on how they were situated, and I think that comes out into comics. So that's my really long-winded and winding answer of how my characters, the different sort of, you know, experiences they had from being on this planet is kind of the thing I really liked. And of course, the baby aliens, though, of course. Anyway, Jimmy.
My answer's probably going to be a lot briefer. I'd say Sanda's my favourite just because she's the feisty one. You know, she's a bit more kind of, she questions the situation that they're in, whereas like Champo's more willing to go along with it. You know, so I suppose I identify with that a bit more. Visually, I love some of the designs for the aliens. The squid. What's his name again, Sarah?
Bobby. Well, we nicknamed him Squid Wizard, didn't we? Squid Wizard. A wizardy, weird look.
The big bear guy, he's cool as well. What's his name?
Tendai. The big one's Tendai. There's kind of two. So there's the Adro, the baddie, and then Tendai. They're kind of the same species of alien, if you like. Yes. And one of them is sort of like a, you know, the sort of evil politician type character, and the other one is kind of a mathematician. So we gave each of the aliens were an expert type, if you like in our heads. One of them's a historian, one of them's a scientist, one of them's the mathematician. So the historian asks, you know, says, you know, are you asking the right question? And there's sort of phrases in there that are typical to different types of experts depending on their philosophy. So yeah, that's a quite good page here. You've got like what was amazing was the different styles of art that, you know, that were delivered and the different interpretations. I mean, Rachel Smith's hers was a flashback to Earth, and you get more of a sense of the dynamic at home with the mum, and she just wrote absolutely beautiful little chapter about, you know, that helped you to sort of understand why they were experiencing Planet Divoc in that way and what happened to them on Earth to kind of make them that way, and what there was a little bit of a block between the two characters. So Rachel did a really good job of kind of helping us to understand that. And then in the middle you had Carrie Fransman's one, the color she did on it. So actually was that the only one you didn't color, Jimmy?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so Jimmy colored the whole thing as well as drawing the last chapter. But
yeah, because I mean Carrie's style was so distinctive that it was an integral part of the artwork, the fact that she coloured it, you know, it just had to be done that way.
Yeah. And then Anand Arkay's chapter, again, the writer was Nabil Peterson, who actually we're working on another project now, who's a South African writer. It was his debut. Mm-hmm. But yeah, again, his artwork was kind of, it felt that really sort of sci-fi sort of, it kind of just really worked for that particular chapter, and the way that it there was a lot of sort of tragedy in that one, and it was quite, you know, a lot of mystery in that one. And so yeah, it was just really, really amazing. Every time the artwork came in, I was just in awe, like this artist. It's brilliant. So yeah, it was a real joy.
So I know I usually lead with this question, but Sarah, I believe you said that you were kind of new to comics. Do you remember like maybe the first comic book that, you know, made you want to explore the, you know, writing something as a, you know, comic, or doing this project as a comic?
Well, no, I mean, in my childhood, like I was massively into the Beano and stuff like that. So I was kind of part of the Bash Street Kids, where they get the badges and all of that sort of business. So I would like run to the shop with my 50p or whatever it was and get the Beano every week, and absolutely love that. And then I guess my real dive into comics was the Vertigo line when I was like 93, 94, when I went off to university. I remember somebody handing me a Sandman, and I was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? And just like, and then all the Vertigo, you know, reading the Vertigo line. And I guess I love comics, but I never in a million years thought I just had no idea how you would even get into writing comics.
Mhm.
And really, ended up working in telly and documentaries. And then for various reasons got really disheartened with working in telly. And so I pitched this idea. I was getting funding for various science engagement projects, and I pitched the idea. Well, I started developing the idea to pitch to a grant to Wellcome Trust, and I was always interested in this idea of a character, sort of like a female surgeon, because I'd worked with lots of surgeons within the documentaries I've made, and they're really interesting type of person, a surgeon, and their ability to focus, and there's lots of different sort of features about them I found fascinating. And so that sort of Surgeon X character sort of evolved. And I remember thinking at the time, well, what would be the worst thing? What would be the hardest world, if you like, for a surgeon to function in? And then I started reading about the antibiotic crisis and how antibiotics are becoming less effective, and what that means. And it means it's like, everything is impacted, from childbirth to surgery to diseases. And so, that love of vertigo, I guess, then came back to me at that point, and approached Karen Berger about writing, about sort of being involved in editor for that comic. And so I guess that idea of reading Vertigo comics and actually ever getting to work with Karen Berger, it was kind of quite a bonkers notion, I guess, but it worked out.
And I guess Jimmy, James.
Anything's fine, man. Well, for me, like Sarah, if you're a kid growing up in the UK in the 1980s, and from any time from the 1940s, I suppose, right through to the 80s and 90s, the Beano was like a staple. The Beano, the Dandy, both published by DC Thomson, a very old and highly respected Scottish publisher. Also by DC Thomson, all Scottish kids are kind of like weaned on the Bruins and Oor Willie. I don't know if you've heard of those, Chad.
Yep.
No. Very, very, they've been around since, the 40s or something, the 30s even. Newspaper strips, they're kind of just about the adventures of a Scottish kid, and one of them's this big, huge Scottish family, but they got up to all sorts of, craziness. And I was always a big fan of the kind of American comics as well, because when I was a kid in the UK, we used to have reprints. We'd get Marvel UK, so I would read Spider-Man and whatnot when I was about 4-year-old, but it would be the UK reprints would be done like weeklies, and rather than getting 22 pages, they would just split it. So you would get 11 pages in each issue, and then you get a backup strip. So I was always, I don't remember a time when I wasn't aware of American superheroes, because they were always in the zeitgeist. There was TV shows. You're going back here, so you're talking about Bill Bixby, Hulk, and Nicholas Hammond, Spider-Man, stuff like that. And there was cartoons as well, Spider-Man cartoons on TV, Fantastic Four. So, yeah. Plus, sometimes I would occasionally get the odd actual kind of US copy of a comic. I don't know, it would be my grandfather or my dad or whatever would just somehow, this comic would appear one day, and I had no idea where they got it from, because you used to be able to get them in second-hand shops and all that. This was before the direct market, it was a thing over here. So they were very, very hard to come by, these things, but I've heard stories that, I don't know how true this is, but apparently they were used as ballast in the ships during World War II and stuff like that. There's always been a kind of strong kind of American military presence over here, because of that whole kind of thing. And apparently the US troops used to bring them over in their ships. So therefore the west coast of Scotland always got exposed to American comic books. There's always been a little connection there. So
it began as a webcomic, but I believe that about a month ago it came out as a print comic. And can you talk a little bit about the print comic, because it was kind of like a I don't want to say fundraiser, but kind of like for the profits are going towards, can you talk about what the profits are going towards?
Yeah, so the profits are going towards the young people, and sort of it can be for them to do, to pay for art classes, to pay for whatever. And the way that we work is sort of when we get to a certain pot, which, it's not going to be loads, as we know, unless you're selling huge amounts of comics, you're not going to make loads, but we'll convene the young people again, and they'll decide how they want to spend it. And it will be, for their education or from art materials or whatever else. And yeah, so we were lucky. We worked with, it was interesting when we were looking at getting it published. There's a friend of mine, the people at Velocity Press, the person who runs Velocity Press. And what we had with the comic is we had a load of curated playlists. So we had loads of DJs from around the world would create playlists to go with each chapter. And I worked with music journalist Joe Muggs, who's a friend of mine from long ago. And he helped us sort of find these DJs. And for the comic, he interviewed them all. And he asked them sort of questions about their experiences as musicians during the pandemic. So the comic has at the back all these interviews that Joe did. But it's also got, one of the things that the young people did is they created stories, poems, artwork, all loads of extra material that was put onto webtoons as well. And we've managed to take some of that and put that as the back matter in the comic as well. So we have the stories, but we also have, some of the young people's work and those interviews. And
as we kind of wrap up here, because I know that it's later for you guys than here, but is there anything, what do you want people to take away from, the series?
I mean, I think for me, I suppose the way that I work is kind of, it's never just about the comic, it's about the process as well and the people we're working with. And we always look at a policy change element for it. And for this, our project was scientists, researchers listening to young voices as part of the project as well. And so on the website, we have this sort of little manifesto, which is devised by all the young people and shares some of their views. So, I mean, I guess in terms of what people take away, I guess it depends who you are. Like if you're a researcher or somebody who's a bit more sciencey knowledge reading this, I think kind of look at the back materials as well as reading the story and see how the sort of the picture of that's it. Yeah, that's some of those. How the whole project, you can see as the story evolved, how all of those conversations led to these quite well considered, I think, sort of manifesto that the young people created. So, and I guess just from a comics fan point of view, I guess just enjoy the different styles of the sort of the writers and the artists in this exquisite corpse, and enjoy
the extra large bubbles as well for webtoons.
Yes. Do you know what? As somebody who's past 40 now, like I love big speech, but I love big writing in comics. I'm like, I love the art, but I can't read it. I need bigger writing. So I quite enjoy the whole, and it's quite nice to write less words, isn't it? It's always good to write less words. More art, less words.
Well, is there anything else that maybe either of you wanted to mention about the project, or wanted people to know about it? And
I guess it's just it's available. Yeah, it's available in the UK in bookshops, and internationally you can get it directly from the Velocity Press website. And that we're doing more of these sorts of projects. We've got another one coming out, launching at the Global Health Conference in South Africa in November, which is another participatory comic where we work with people in Malawi, and it's written by one of the writers, Nabil, on this, and an artist street artist called Mohammed, based in South Africa. And James and I are working on another project, which is coming out next year at some point. And that's completely different. That's kind of a real fun time travel story. I call it sort of like a midlife crisis time travel story, because I feel like people get to a certain age and then they write a time travel story, looking back at the period that they hold dear. And for us, ours is like rave scene and rave culture. We were both really, really into that, electronic music. So our story is looking back, it's an adventure into the past and featuring the present. Jimmy, do you want to say anything else?
No, I think you covered it there, Sarah.
Well, are you guys on social media? You want to give out, if you are, you want to give out, your where people can follow you or find out more about you?
I lurk on Twitter and retweet stuff, but don't, I'm not a very good social media user. I find it, I'm not great on it. But yeah, Sarah without an HM Kenney on Twitter. Yeah,
I am not very visible on social media, but I do have a website which is eanimated.com.
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to chat, and maybe when you guys have your next projects coming out, then we'll have you back and you can talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
all right. Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad we finally got the time issue worked out, and it was a great time chatting with you, and I hope you guys stay safe, and best of luck on your future projects.
Thank you.
Cool. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Have a great evening.